Hello, and welcome to the fourth presentation of Avalanche Canada's webinar series. I hope everybody's having a nice Remembrance Day holiday, and I'd like to give a special shout out to Scout Troop 214 joining us from Calgary, Alberta. Thanks for joining in, gang. First, we'd like to thank our sponsors. We're very thankful for our sponsors and their financial support for us during this challenging economic climate and working with us to reach new backcountry users this winter. We have our program partners, our premier sponsors, and our many contributors. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Everyone should know that they're muted automatically in the GoTo software. There will be an opportunity to ask questions. To do so, you'll click on the raise hand icon in the GoTo dashboard. Our producer, me, will unmute you so that you can ask a question. Another way to ask a question is in the question chat box, also on the GoTo dashboard. We'll have a question and answer period after each of our two presenters tonight. Today's presentation is about recognizing avalanche terrain and trip preparedness. Do you ever look at avalanche terrain and wonder whether or not you should venture into it? The presentation this evening will look at terrain, weather, and snowpack factors to help you make decisions in the backcountry. We will look at the resources available on the Avalanche Canada website, and Adventure Smart will also present on trip preparedness. Our first presenter this evening is Mark Bender. Mark is a senior avalanche forecaster with Avalanche Canada who's worked in this avalanche safety industry in a variety of capacities since 1994. Our second presenter is Sandra Riches, the Executive Director for BC Adventure Smart. She works closely with BC Search and Rescue, National Search and Rescue affiliates, and industry outdoor rec supporters to increase awareness about personal preparedness, safe outdoor practices, helping to reduce the number and severity of search and rescue incidents. And I'll pass it along to Mark now. Enjoy the presentation.
Thanks, Colin. Good evening, folks. I'm here this evening to talk to you folks about avalanche basics, an introduction to recreating in avalanche terrain. So the goal of this presentation is to inform people that recreate in mountainous terrain about avalanches. So I love this picture. It kind of illustrates quite a lot. It's taken above Howe Sound, just slightly north of Vancouver. Highway, the Sea to Sky Highway runs along just down below here, and you can get on a hiking trail and quite quickly, relatively quickly, I should say, you can end up in terrain like this if you own a pair of snowshoes, or even people hike up there in the wintertime. This just shows you what's possible and how people can quickly get up into mountainous terrain. And for that very reason is why we're here tonight, why we want to talk about avalanches, and at least being able to recognize what avalanche terrain is and open people's eyes, make people aware. Before we start, I'm just going to talk briefly about Avalanche Canada. Avalanche Canada is a public avalanche safety organization based in Canada, and we represent the interests of folks like yourself. We offer a variety of products and services, and one of those is a daily avalanche forecast. So for a variety of regions throughout British Columbia, and we offer avalanche awareness programs, just like what we're doing right here, right now. We offer recreational training, and we're the point of contact for avalanche information in Canada. We also backstop a number of research products to help advance avalanche safety in general. Our mandate is to eliminate avalanche fatalities and injuries in Canada. So before we get too deep into this, I want to find out a little bit what folks about you folks out there. So what is your preferred method of travel? Colin, maybe we can run a poll here.
Great, folks. I've launched that poll now, and you can rest assured that it's anonymous, so feel free to participate and click your preferred way of getting around in the backcountry.
Great. And I'm seeing we've got people from all types of backgrounds here. We've got 33% of our participants are snowshoers, 60% are skiers and or snowboarders. We've got some snowmobilers, about 5%, and we've got some ice climbers. So that's great. We have participation from a wide variety of people. So really, let's get into it. I put up a photo here. What is an avalanche? Avalanches are essentially snow tumbling down a slope, releasing and falling down a slope. If you look at this photo, this tells us, it tells a number of different stories. First off, what catches my eye right off the bat is this pile of snow here. Secondly, you notice that the avalanche has run on a slope. So we'll talk about this in a little bit more in detail, but there's some terrain and it's steep terrain. We have snow and there's also a person standing on the slope. Let's get into that in a little bit more detail. Let's get into a little bit deeper here. What I'm gonna do is run a video for you. Let me just cue this up here. And you're going to notice this person walking across the slope, and the guy on skis here triggers an avalanche.
Wow.
This also says a fair amount for us. If you have a look, if you remember, if you harken back to that picture that I just put up, just give me 1 second here. I'm just going to bring us back to our main screen and move beyond. And now that we've had a little bit of a primer, this starts to make a little bit more sense. So in order to have an avalanche, we need to have the right amount of terrain. So terrain steep enough in order for the snow to actually slide. We have to have snow that sits on that terrain. And we also need a trigger. In this instance, and in the video's instance, that trigger happened to be a person. But a trigger for an avalanche could be any variety of things. It could be the weight of the existing snowpack. It could be snow falling from the sky, snow transported by the wind. And I'll get into all this in a little bit deeper as we move along through the presentation here. Let's do another poll here. What level of avalanche education do you have? Colin, if you can run the next poll for me, please.
Great, Mark. I'll launch that right now.
Okay, so looking at this is great. We have some folks who've taken an avalanche skills training course before. We've got at least 1%, or I should say at least 30% of our viewers, almost the majority, but not quite, who have never taken any kind of avalanche education before. And we've got 20% who have taken maybe some seminars or some workshops in the past. And avalanche skills training course level 1, probably 36% it looks like, and about 10% who've taken a second level avalanche skills training course. So this is great. We have a big variety of folks. Let's carry on with this. Let's talk about snow. So when I talk about snow sitting on top of the slope, we need to have a certain amount of snow. And looking at this picture, you can start to see that the underlying ground surface, the dirt surface has disappeared, and we need probably anywhere from about 30 to 50 centimeters of snow sitting on the ground on that slope to have enough snow to produce an avalanche. So we need a threshold amount of snow. Let's look at this next photo here. This person standing there, I think that guy's on snowshoes here, but he's looking across. This slope is undoubtedly probably steep enough to produce an avalanche, but the big question is how much snow is sitting on top of there. And if you can see a smooth snow surface where there's no ground roughness that's poking through, you can see, if you see my mouse right here, I'm pointing out all the different rocks that are showing here. Once those rocks and all that stuff starts to disappear, we probably have a smooth enough surface to start producing avalanches. If there's not enough snow on the slope, the surface roughness is probably too rough to produce an avalanche. So this picture kind of depicts it for us. Where I'm in Revelstoke right now, and it snowed yesterday. Just a little reminder that winter's started here. And down in town, we probably have about the same amount of snow as what's sitting on the ground here. But if you look across at all these slopes, you can really see that the terrain is very featured. And you can see all the rocks pointing through all over the place. So there's really not enough snow here to avalanche. That's just a depiction of that if you were out hiking. Let's move on to terrain. I talked about terrain steep enough, sufficiently steep enough to slide. The majority of avalanches start on a slope of about 30 degrees or greater. So imagine that if you were to walk up a slope that's about 30 degrees, if you walked straight up that slope, that's actually quite steep, and you'd be huffing and puffing if you were walking straight up the slope. So you got to imagine what the slope steepness is, and being able to recognize that is really key to understanding if you're in avalanche terrain or not. Terrain that's too shallow, the snow is held in place by gravity, but if it's too steep, much like what you see in the picture here, this is a cliff band, anything over about 50 or 55, or I'd say 55 degrees or 60 degrees, almost what we would consider to be like almost cliffy terrain. You'd probably have, if you were walking up it, you would have to be on all floors using your hands and your feet to get up terrain that's that steep. The snow tends to slough off of that terrain and just avalanches or sloughs off continuously. It never actually sticks on the terrain. It doesn't accumulate enough to create avalanches that are dangerous enough to people. When we talk about terrain, we also talk about vegetative coverage. So quite often in the places that we like to recreate in the mountains, we have to pass through trees or forests. And in this instance, in this image, this person's probably walking up through a forest, but the trees are sparse enough and the space is open enough that you could actually consider this to be avalanche terrain. But if the trees were tight enough, so that each tree was about 2 or 3 meters apart from each other, it might not, even though it was steep enough to be avalanche terrain, the trees themselves actually prevent avalanches from happening. But if you look at this, you can see that there's a lot of space in between the trees. So I would very much call this avalanche terrain. When you look at that person, you can actually tell how steep the terrain is also, just by looking at where they are on the slope. When I talked about dense trees or dense forest, and I talked about 2 or 3 meters apart, if your typical forest here, if you're on the coast or if you're in the Rocky Mountains, quite often the forests are quite dense, and the trees themselves act as anchors to hold the snow together. And there's just not enough room in between the trees to actually allow avalanches to happen. Let's move on to triggers. Avalanche triggers, just like those pictures. If you remember the pictures or even the video that I ran at the beginning, a trigger could be a person, regardless of what type of activity that you're participating in, whether you're a snowshoer, you're a skier, a snowboarder, or a hiker, or even traveling on a snowmobile. The weight that you produce on the snow that's sitting on top of a slope that's steep enough to slide could be enough to trigger an avalanche if the conditions exist to do that. Triggers could also be considered to be cornices. So that's overhanging snow. If you look at the picture right here where my mouse is, as the snow gets transported by the wind from this side here, it deposits on the other side of the slope where it's sufficiently steep enough on the breakover, the snow starts to create an overhang, and that could be a cornice. If that breaks off, that could be considered a trigger. Rocks in the snow or snow falling from trees or off of cliffs could be enough to set off avalanches, or even an artificial trigger like an explosive that you might see people using in a ski area or something like that. Triggers could also be what we would call natural triggers, or weather conditions creating enough of a trigger to create an avalanche. This picture speaks 1,000 words. This person's protecting themselves from the wind. The wind, you can actually see the snow that's being picked up by the wind. Snow transports, or wind transports snow into slopes and can create big deposits of snow. Also, the snow falling from that falls during snowfalls lands on the slope and can overload the snowpack that sits on the ground. Warm weather or strong sun during the warmer winter months can also act as triggers for avalanches. Let's have a look at another video here, and this will kind of summarize the things that I've been talking about coming up here. I will just give me a second. I'll cue this up. Okay, so that was just a little bit of a summary, but you can actually, the slope that was depicted within the animation actually showed a slope that was about 45 degrees in steepness, and that's quite steep, if you can imagine. Let's talk about a little bit about risk in avalanche terrain. So avalanche terrain exists. Snow sits on top of the avalanche terrain. But if we're nowhere near the avalanche terrain, we're not at risk to get caught in avalanches. So it's really important to understand where we are and how we travel through terrain, and being aware of where avalanche terrain exists, and sometimes it's done for us. This is a picture of the Sunshine Ski Resort near Banff in Alberta. This is probably an early season picture. There's not all that much snow sitting here at the moment, but this gives us a really good idea of the ski area boundary here, or the resort boundary. And within this area here, there are people who actually take care of the avalanche risk for us. And so it's important for us to understand that. We probably all know that. And we've probably seen the signage along the ski area boundary when you're about to leave the boundary. Here's another depiction. On your way up to the ski area, you got to follow some public roads. Well, there's people who take care of the avalanche risk for public roads. If you look here, you can actually see these are avalanche paths, and here's the road itself. And in Banff National Park, there's actually a crew of people who go around. They do avalanche control for those avalanche paths to protect the roads and the highways. The same thing in British Columbia. There's crews of people who do that. Everything outside of these two areas we would consider the backcountry. So the whole point is understand when you're in places where the avalanche risk is taken care of for you, and understand when you're in places where it's not. And if you're in places where it's not, it's important to be informed. And this, for a lot of folks, might just be the very beginning, the first step. So driving on a public road, highways operations, like I mentioned, are responsible for minimizing the avalanche risk to drivers. And if you've ever driven through Rogers Pass, which is really close to where I live here, or I should call it Revelstoke or Revelstuck, because quite often the roads to the east, the roads to the west, they shut down because of avalanche danger, and we get stuck here in Revelstoke. Usually that's just for a short period of time, but those crews, they're hard at work in the winter months. Within the ski areas, we talked about the ski area boundary, and we have signage warning people, hey, you're about to leave the controlled area here, and you're going to be responsible for your own risk once you go beyond the avalanche or go beyond the boundary. So let's talk a little bit about, let's just do a little video here. When I talked about people taking care of the risk for you, I will switch to another video. Let's just watch a little bit of a video on avalanche control and how these folks. So this first video is just about, it just shows a automatic or a remote avalanche control device. The second one speaks for itself. And we had some great music there. Let's get back to my main screen here. Some wonderful music with the hand charging portion of the video, but that just gives you an idea of when these crews go out, how they go about reducing the hazards so that you have low risk when you participate in the recreational activity within the ski area or drive along the highways. Everywhere else, if you're not in a ski area or you're not in a controlled environment, everywhere else we would consider you to be in the backcountry, and it's your responsibility for understanding where you are at risk and how to effectively reduce that risk. So a lot of trail signs for places for either hiking trails or places when people area like gates where people leave ski area boundaries. Quite often there's warning signs. You even might see a sign like this with a map on it. That's an avalanche terrain exposure scale map. Quite often a lot of these trailheads have these, and that's your first clue that you're about to enter into places where you're in an uncontrolled environment. However, if you have a look, quite often a lot of the trailheads don't have that information, and it's really important for you to understand where there's resources, where resources are, so that you can tap in to understand if you're getting yourself into a risky situation. This picture just depicts something along those lines. Maybe you're headed off onto a trail that has no warning signs or no indication that you're in there. So hopefully you've taken an awareness course that you can actually reduce the risk for yourself. If you look at our website at avalanche.ca, we have a number of really useful resources. One of them is called the Trip Planner, and if you go onto our website on the home page and you go to Backcountry Resources or to our Learn tab, right up where you see my cursor is here, and you look for Trip Planner, this can just give you an idea of places where you might be able to go where we've actually done some avalanche terrain exposure scale mapping. And the avalanche terrain exposure scale just gives you an idea of what type of avalanche terrain, if there is any, in certain recreational areas throughout British Columbia. A lot of these, it just gives you a little bit of a forewarning so that you can start to plan your trip and anticipate where you're actually heading to. If you travel in areas where avalanche hazard is not managed by others, what can you do? Go to avalanche.ca. If you go to this is a picture of our homepage and depicts all of the avalanche forecast regions that we have throughout British Columbia. And now this takes a little bit of an education to learn how to read these, but if you go to the homepage, you'll see little icons. If you went there right now, the icons don't exactly look like this because we haven't actually started to write our forecast. We just have general messaging at the moment. But of course, there are a number of resources on our webpage. We'll be starting up our forecasts in about a week and a half. But if you clicked on these regions or on this icon for the forecast, you get a sidebar that, much like what you see here, it gives you an avalanche report for the particular geographical region where you might be planning on traveling, and gives you a danger rating, might talk about the avalanche problems, and you can click through and get into more detail throughout the forecast. So avalanche.ca, and I'm going to be referring to a number of resources that we have on our website throughout here. Remember that, avalanche.ca. This is, I say, there's a new snowshoe page, landing page for avalanche.ca. That it was new to us last fall, but in the grand scheme of things, it's still fairly new. But if you are a snowshoer, come to our website, avalanche.ca/snowshoe. Let's talk a little bit about gear that people might want to access. So it's important, if you're planning on traveling in avalanche terrain, that you have the correct gear. That would be a transceiver, a shovel, and a probe. And this gear doesn't prevent you from getting caught in an avalanche, but it does, if you were to get caught in an avalanche, it would enable other people in your group, they would enable them to actually find you. So it's critical, if you're planning on traveling in avalanche terrain, that you arm yourself with a transceiver, avalanche, or a transceiver, probe, and shovel. There's more information that you can find on our webpage also under the Learn tab. This year, what's new this year is we've revamped an online avalanche tutorial. We have an existing one that is on our website at the moment. It's still active. It's at avalanche.ca/tutorial. If you haven't taken an avalanche course before, this is a great place to start. And sometime this fall, we'll be launching our new avalanche tutorial called Abby Savvy. We've updated it, and look for that coming in the very near future here, coming up. It's a great resource if you've never taken an avalanche course before. And it's, even if you've taken an online tutorial before, it's a great way to refresh yourself for the upcoming season. If you haven't taken a course before, there are also resources on our website under the Learn tab regarding avalanche skills training courses. So a training course, we administer those courses. They're actually offered by outside organizations, but we create the curriculum and administer the curriculum. But the resources, there are providers that are listed on our website, and you can go there to get more information on the training courses. So, in summary, hopefully we were able to just give you a little taste of the avalanche world. We want you folks to be able to recognize avalanche terrain. We want folks to understand conditions when avalanches may be possible, and we want folks to be aware of the risks and be prepared. We also want folks to be able to know where to access more information. So the key here is just to inform ourselves. I have to do that myself. I just spent the whole summer doing summer activities, and I'm about to go snowmobiling tomorrow for the first time, and I have to start to refresh my memory on what I need to take, make sure that I have the right equipment, and make sure that I got to research where I'm going to go and understand what I need to do. So even though I've been doing this since the early 90s, I still have to get myself into the mode. I have to inform myself and keep reminding myself of that. So hopefully, folks, you got something out of today's talk. And I'd like to open it up to some questions if there's anybody out there who's got questions. Colin.
Hey, Mark, that was awesome. Really great discussion on ways of looking at terrain and a lot of that that essential information that we need before heading into the backcountry. And the chat box, the question chat box is popping off, and we've got hands raised. So we're going to start getting into some of these questions.
This is one.
So we'll start here with the first question. Irene asks, so regarding terrain with dense trees, when this terrain with dense trees are all burned, so in the case of a forest fire, does this change the nature of the avalanche danger in those areas?
Ooh, that's a great question. Thanks for that. And yes, it does actually. And a lot of times, yes, absolutely, number one. And it just changes the way that the snow is able to fall onto the slope. Even if it was a dense forest, it's probably something that it would need further evaluation, but absolutely it does change it. And it would, like I said, I would have to see the slope itself, but if you do see a slope that where the trees have been burned, I would absolutely, if you're not quite sure and you're not able to make an evaluation yourself, I would just say err on the side of caution and just keep away from that. But excellent question for sure.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, the wind gets into those burns a lot differently, and it's just doesn't anchor the snowpack in the same way as like a dense forest normally does. Yeah, so we have another question here from Fraser. He asks, how common are avalanches in springtime? So he's thinking about when he's hiking peaks in spring and early summer, they've still got a bit of snow on them, but there hasn't been any recent snowfall. Is there much likelihood of he mentions a slip, but we should throw avalanche in there as well, if that's what he's indicating.
Yeah, that's another excellent question. And absolutely, the springtime is still avalanche season. And even for that matter, summertime, even in the alpine regions, in the upper regions of the mountains, in summer, avalanches are still possible if there's snow sitting on the slopes. And I would say in the springtime, especially, we're still very well in avalanche season. We just end up having different types of avalanches quite often. In the winter time, we have dry snow falling and when weather stays cooler. So the majority of snow avalanches that happen in the middle of the winter are dry snow avalanches. And in the springtime, you might have a mix of dry snow avalanches, but if it's a cool spring, and or probably what's most prevalent would be wet snow avalanches. And so absolutely, it's something to really pay attention to. And a lot of times what happens in the springtime is that we have really cold nights and we have really warm days. And during the cold nights, the snowpack almost freezes because the snowpack has probably been so warm. And then during the day, when it warms up, it starts to melt again. And so quite often we tell people the safest time to travel is in early in the morning when it's cool. But of course, there's exceptions to all those. I'm getting down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but there's exceptions to all those rules. So the best thing to do is to tap into our website and keep up to date as to what our avalanche forecasts are saying. But absolutely, the springtime is still avalanche season.
Yeah, that's right. We forecast right into the spring season, and you might see danger ratings starting to transform into more of an advisory of kind of general conditions. But yeah, absolutely, we're always trying to keep people in tune with those conditions. So we have another question here from Kat. She's asking, how do you measure the degree of a slope?
Excellent question. With my eyes, no, it's actually, it's not as, if you have the right tools, it's not as hard as you'd think. And, you know, through years of experience, I've trained my eye to measure the slope. I can recognize that just on my own, but not everybody can do that. And realistically, there are tools out there. It's called an inclinometer. And quite often, there's ones that are specific that you can buy at a place like an outdoor store, like a Mountain Equipment Co-op. They would sell an inclinometer that is specific to measuring avalanche slopes. The other trick too is a lot of compasses are sold with inclinometers built into them. So that's just another source where folks could actually go and get that information so they can get that tool themselves to help them measure.
Yeah, that's a key tool. Makes a lot of sense. Use it a bunch, and then you'll be able to judge slope incline just with your eyeballs, like Mark. So we've got another really good question here. Somebody's digging into your comments on avalanches in treed areas, and they're saying, I thought the statement about a lack of avalanches in treed areas was misleading. There was a large avalanche on the Grouse Grind, or kind of adjacent to the Grouse Grind, about 15 years ago that actually killed somebody and injured 2 others. And they've heard of lots of other avalanches in trees as well. So we should probably clarify this point.
This is an excellent point. And it absolutely is a really, really good point, because avalanches do happen in trees, and quite often it's a subtle difference. A lot of times people in dense forests feel like they're safe, but if you are actually adjacent to avalanche terrain, like an avalanche path, where avalanches can actually overrun the path and run into the trees, avalanches can actually happen in the trees, and we've seen that on numerous occasions. So there's just general rules, you know, just opening people's eyes to the fact that even if you're in the trees, we want people to pay attention. Even if you're in the open or in the dense forest, generally avalanches don't happen often within dense forest, but absolutely avalanches can happen. So the moral of the story here is to keep our eyes open and be aware all the time as to where we are in relation to any kind of opening, and or even if you're in dense trees, all of a sudden you can end up in an opening itself, and that itself can be avalanche terrain also.
Yeah, I definitely
hopefully
second
that answers
that
the
idea of,
question, but absolutely a really good point to bring up.
yeah, I definitely second that idea of subtlety in the terrain. Once you start getting into steeper terrain, it can start to matter a little bit less how many trees there are in the terrain. And yeah, definitely takes time and judgment to look at that terrain correctly. One more question, because we do want to get to Sandra's presentation here. Sean's asking, he says, we frequently ski in the same uncontrolled area, so outside of controlled avalanche terrain, 35 to 45 degree slopes. Is there anything we can do to increase the stability of the snowpack throughout the winter?
Well, is there anything you can do? Not, you know, that's a really good question. It's actually an excellent, excellent question. And without going too much down a rabbit hole, there probably, I would say, technically there is, but I would say not. I would say that you would really want to be diligent and keep track of where you've been skiing, but also keep track of the actual snowpack. So, you know, in order to actually make a difference, and in order to actually, so I'll go down the rabbit hole just slightly, but the more you ski a slope, the more you compact the slope. But you have to compact it, you'd have to ski it a huge amount to actually make a difference on the slope. And the amount that we might actually go out skiing recreationally for would not be enough. When you actually go to a ski area and you're talking about thousands upon thousands of people skiing on a slope all at once and continuously, that is enough to actually change the way the snowpack sits on the slope, or change the consistency of the snow. So the short answer is, for people who are just skiing in a backcountry area recreationally, no. The answer is no. But is it possible to do that? Yes, but only if you really, really have a huge amount of skiers or a huge amount of snowmobilers who are continuously traveling on that slope to change the way the snowpack sits on that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Really tricky to start making decisions on that kind of slope compaction idea. And it really depends on the kind of avalanche problem you're dealing with too. And some avalanche problems just won't really be helped, and actually could even get worse with that kind of with slope compaction. So some technical talk there. That's awesome. So want to thank you once again, Mark, for an awesome presentation and great answers to some really great questions from the crowd. Thanks for diving in there, guys, and not being shy about asking your questions. Now, before we get too late, I want to get into Sandra's presentation. So I'm just going to hand it over to Sandra, and she's going to take it from here. There you go, Sandra, and you can just launch your presentation and you'll be good to go. Awesome, we can see it now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thanks, Mark. Great presentation there, and thanks for handing the mic over, Colin. Welcome, everyone. I'm Sandra with the Adventure Smart program. I also work closely with the BC Search and Rescue Association. And tonight we're giving you a Coles Notes version of one of our programs. We actually have 5 defined programs, curriculum-based, underneath the Adventure Smart umbrella. This is a mini version of our Survive Outside program, and we're going to focus on the 3 T's, and that's what we kind of focus all of our messaging around is trip planning, training, and taking those essentials. Everyone has their own version of what those are, but I'll jump into what we define them as and how they can really help you improve your next adventure.
Hey, Sandra,
Adventure Smart is a national program.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to get your webcam online, if that's okay. And we can see you as well as hear you.
Okay.
Just lost your presentation, and there's your webcam, and then just launch your presentation again, and we'll be back online. Perfect. Okay, I'll be quiet now.
We're all set. Thank you. Adventure Smart is a national program that actually started in British Columbia 16 years ago, and it was started by the BC Search and Rescue Association. The reason it began is because at that time they realized that British Columbia has more search and rescue calls than the rest of the country combined on an annual basis. That's still the fact today. The whole focus behind the program then and now is to engage, inform, and educate outdoor enthusiasts, no matter the experience level, or if you're new to the outdoors or experienced. And the main focus is to reduce the number and severity of those search and rescue calls right across the country. In BC, we have an active sector of the Adventure Smart program, and we're quite a busy bunch here at our crew. We're out there to educate and teach and inform everyone, really just to engage, either a quick conversation at a trailhead, at a ski hill, and currently online. There's a few sections to each one of those T's. Trip planning really consists of making a plan and leaving a plan, and both are important sections of that first T. The second one is training. That can be certification based, it can be mentorship, physical training. I'll get into that in a second. And the third is taking those essentials, and then make sure that you add to them season and sport specific. The first T is trip planning. So planning your travel route and the navigation it's going to take to complete that successfully. And remember, your destination is always home, that's for sure. So making that plan, I hate to use the word homework, but it is. If you take the time, it can be fun homework if there's such a thing, and take the time to really think about where you're going and consider the terrain and the conditions. There are so many ways to research your adventure. We have one example here, All Trails. You can plug in the trail that you want to head out on, and it will give you so much awesome information visually, stats, length of time, return trip, kilometer route, elevation, gain and loss. It gives you a little briefing on the weather. It's an awesome example of how you can start to plan your adventure and make sure it's a safe one. And it really will define the difference between a stroll like we've got there at Burnaby Lake or a bit more of a challenging trail. Lynn Peak is one example of many in BC. While you're planning that adventure, you have to really consider the weather. It's important to think about the likelihood of precipitation. We're in that shoulder season right now throughout here in the fall, and it's changing quickly. As Mark mentioned, he's heading for a sled tomorrow, which is awesome. And I think we're about to get some snow down here on the coast again. So really consider the possibility of precipitation and what kind of precipitation could you run into? And are you prepared for it on many ways? And the temperature change, we have to really consider as we go for these adventures, if it's a snowshoe, putting on those micro spikes and gaining that elevation, what happens? The temperature drops, as we know, but not everyone really considers that and doesn't always go prepared with the right clothing. They prep down here in the mainland or in the city and then head up and don't have all the gear that they should. Think of the wind speed, the precipitation amounts, how much is coming down. I think there's some snow coming our way soon, and really look at the finer details and the sunset time. That's critical. We all just changed the clocks, like it or not, and we've lost an hour. So really consider, when does that sun set? When do I have light until natural light? And do I have a light source to take with me to make sure that I can get out safely? Trip planning still consists of a few things. So we can leave a trip plan with someone. Your mom is probably your most trusted emergency contact. And here's a little example of what a simple text could look like to your mom. You're gonna say you're heading for a hike tomorrow in the mountains. So you've given her fair warning. There's a day. You're letting her know the time that she's leaving or that you're leaving and when you plan to be back. Some location information and give some descriptions there and what you'll be wearing. This is important in case something goes wrong, because search and rescue love those details. They turn into investigators, really. And the more detail you can leave, the better. Let them know who you're going with. This case, it's John and Chrissy, and their phone numbers, which is important. And when you'll be back, which is a really critical part of your trip plan. So they have some information of when you'll be returning. And in that last text, it actually gives details. They plan to be back by 5. And if not, give that person a call. And if not, then give the emergency contacts a call in there. And then if they're not back by 6, to call 911. So there's strict instructions on how that will work. We're gonna watch a little video here that will show you a little bit about our trip plan app that can make this really easy. Any trip plan works. A note in the fridge, trailhead selfie, note in the car, but our app helps you, prompt you through it, and it's a one-stop shop. Just gonna show that for you. There you go. And before I jump into the next section here, I was wondering if Colin could pull up a survey and we can chat about some options for what causes search and rescue incidents.
sure
If you don't mind, Colin, that would be great.
I'll launch that poll right now.
Thank you. So I really want you to think about what is the leading cause in the wintertime for search and rescue incidents in the province of BC, just in British Columbia. You might have some idea in your region. You might think it might be something unique to wherever you live in the province, or it might be unique to where you are in Canada for those who aren't in British Columbia. But this one is just some information here about what you think it might happen. I can see some answers coming in here. Some think, smaller think that it's actually injury as the number one there. And we've got quite a few people that think lost and disoriented is pretty high. And then some believe that it's exceeding abilities. And they all fall under.
Yeah, lots of folks come in here. I'll show the poll so everybody can take a look at the results here. There you have it.
There you go. So thanks, Colin. That's awesome. This really gives you an idea of what I know. And we're able to figure this out based on search and rescue groups, collecting those stats after every call. And in British Columbia, there's 1,700 search and rescue calls every year. So they have a little bit of paperwork to do. And we come up with really helpful information for me to educate the public on how these things could happen. So we know that number one is being lost or disoriented. So it's really important that you need to help us, and in turn that helps out search and rescue on how you can improve that from happening in the future. How can you do that? You can get trained, and you can think about how that applies to the activity that you love to do. Training is continuous. Mark talked about it, and you answered earlier about some of the skills that you all have. That can be certification based. It can be AST, map and compass. It could be my dad showing me how to chop wood and make a fire when I was young, and it's still a great skill that I have today. So there's all levels of training. And as we decide to push our adventures to new limits, it's important to add to those skills and abilities as you adventure further, or into new activities, or into a new activity at all, from maybe new Canadians who are living here and would love to go exploring because it's so easily accessible. Don't be fooled by that easy access, please. You have to still be trained. There's a few components to think about. Activity-specific skill training, AST is a great one, and that could, depending on the season and the sport, Mark's heading for a sled tomorrow and I'm heading for a mountain bike. So we have different activity skills training for those two activities. Physical fitness is huge. Again, we have easy access throughout BC to awesome terrain. That easy access gives us a false sense of security, and not everyone feels that they have to really think about being physically fit for those adventures because it's so easy to get to, but you do. And also don't forget about that mental strength. That's important too. Navigation and route finding, critical. Not everyone knows how to use a map and a compass together. They often result to a good old phone for a few things. Getting trained in some navigation and route finding is a bonus. You won't go amiss on that. First aid training, really important, and you can keep that regular. And wilderness first aid training is even more important if you decide to head into the backcountry. And then rescue and emergency training, and making sure that you're self-sufficient in your group, that you have self-rescue skills. And that could just be that you know how to signal search and rescue because something's happened, there's been an injury, and now you need to alert search and rescue. How are you going to communicate with them? How will you take care of your party in that situation that you're in at the moment? Let's talk about essentials for a sec. We've all heard about the essentials, or the 10 essentials. We've veered away from the 10 essentials for a number of years now because we know there's more. We don't want you to stop at 10. So the first checklist there is also shown in the picture. So we've got that headlamp and flashlight, critical for right now, always though, and extra batteries, don't forget that. Fire starter kit, and know how to use it, that's key. Signaling device, could be a loud whistle, an emergency card to signal for aircraft, first aid kit, pocket knife, sun protection, and an emergency shelter. All of those can fit into that red sack, which is really helpful. And then we can talk about the other items as well, that extra food and water, extra warm clothing, that layering, nav and communication. So you can see everything earlier is listed is now tucked in that little red sack there at the top of the picture left-hand corner, and everything else can be added to. So this isn't an onerous task, it's pretty simple. My essentials stay all the time in my pack, no matter if I'm heading out for that mountain bike or going snowmobiling. The essentials stay, and then I add to it season and sport specific. This gives a good visual of those essentials. So that top left-hand corner, that yellow box has those essentials. We've got our basics in the red sack, everything else is there. And then let's say we're heading for a backcountry ski. Here's our extra season and sport specific gears, Avalanche transceiver, which Mark talked about earlier. Knowing how to use it, it's key. Take those extra batteries. We've got our goggles and helmet. We've got the skis, of course, and poles, Avalanche probe, that shovel and gloves. So those are your added pieces that go to your basic essentials. So those 3 T's are critical to remember, and trip planning, training, and taking essentials. And we can elaborate on that a little bit further in any of our programming. I really encourage you to take your phone right now, and you can actually take a picture of that QR code. And what it's going to do is it's going to take you straight to our Adventure Smart app, and you can download that. It's free. And then you've got that to help you trip plan, help you leave that information with friends or family. And then if something does go wrong, then search and rescue have it, and they can help you faster, and which means you'll be in better condition, which reduces the severity of that call. Join us on any of our socials. And again, Adventure Smart is a national program, so there is a website with our consistent national message at adventuresmart.ca. But in BC, we're quite active on quite a few platforms here, and there's 3 right there at the same handle. Future events for an expanded version of this presentation and many more will be on our Facebook under our events page. Thanks, Mark, for having me, and Avalanche Canada, and Colin, I appreciate it. And wishing everyone a safe and Adventure Smart winter ahead.
Thanks so much, Sandra. That was awesome. All kinds of great info there. Hope you can stick around for a few questions. We'd like to dabble a little bit in these hands up questions. We've got a few people that have had hands up for quite a few minutes, so there may be questions for Mark, and we've got Mark online too if they are Avalanche related questions. And maybe we'll start with, we've got Ed Hensel here. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and you can speak up and ask your question when you're ready, Ed.
Hi, Sandra. I was just wondering, 10 essentials, you said they're season specific. Is there anything other than the common winter stuff that you would bring with a fire starter, for instance? Is that even worthwhile bringing?
So the basics stay the same, and there is a list on the website, and that list there in the check mark is everything there that shows you what you should carry. So yeah, this is your starter kit, and that always stays in my pack no matter the season and the activity. And then adding to it season and sport specific helps me keep me going on my mountain bike if I need extra bike tools. I've got my knee pads, elbow pads, multi-tool, but this stays the same. So that fire starter kit goes with me wherever I go, and as long as I know how to use it in all those conditions, which kind of goes back to the training component, practicing lighting that fire in general, but also maybe in wet conditions, and how does it work, and does everything you have in your kit actually work, and or maybe in snow conditions as well. And so it's still good to have it in there for sure.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ed. Now we'll move to Evelyn Benson. If you're ready with your question, I'll go ahead and unmute you.
Hi, yes. With all the 10 essentials, that's awesome. I'm just wondering, I know that this is more Avalanche directed, but you know, with Avalanche gear, is it recommended to carry Avalanche gear if you do have it?
What do you think, Mark?
Absolutely. I mean, if you do have Avalanche gear and you are planning on going into Avalanche terrain, then absolutely, yeah, bring it with you, because if you need it, you've got it. Is the idea here. Hopefully that's answering your question.
Absolutely. Thank you.
There could even be another party. You know, you could think of it that way too. Even if you don't need it, there could be another party that could benefit from you having that equipment with you.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Evelyn. And we've got Joseph Caruso here with another question. He's had his hand up for, maybe just a short time. Have you got a question, Joseph? That might be it for our hands up questions, but we can take a look at the chat. Here in the chat. Yeah, we've got one from Jen here who's managing the chat. She's going to come on.
I think this question is from Paula, and I think it's directed at you, Sandra. She asks if 911 is appropriate for all areas of the backcountry travel in all areas, or are there other numbers across the country that you use?
Short answer is 911 is your best bet. There's no question about that. And I'm just looking up some sections. If you go to the BC Search and Rescue Association website under calling for 911, calling for search and rescue, that is the number that you need to use. What happens there is any incidents that happens is actually tasked out to the local police or the RCMP. So they're the task manager, and that agency oversees the call. They're not the subject matter experts though. That goes to the local search and rescue group, and that will then be transferred over to that SAR group. So 911 is your start. That's the one you need to know. And also having other forms of communication in line. It didn't get into that section here in this short version tonight, but our more detailed Survive Outside program gets into communications and how to put those in place. But the trip plan is the start, 911 is your answer, and having other communications in line, and they pass it down to search and rescue from the police.
Awesome, thanks so much for that. I'm just gonna take a quick scan here through our hands raised. These are all just kind of folks who just turned it on and off, that's fine. We've got another question from the chat here. I see Maria is asking, and this is maybe a question for Mark. Is it better to do glacier crossings toward the end of winter when crevasses are filled in and snow bridges are established?
Well, okay, so that's a more of a winter travel, winter mountains travel question, not necessarily related to avalanches, but yes, and it depends. But generally, crevasses on glaciated terrain are filled in a lot more at the end of winter or in the middle of winter than they are in the early season, for sure. And but that doesn't make them any less hazardous. You know, once again, it's one of those things is understanding that type of terrain. So we've been talking about avalanches, being prepared for those. It's also being prepared for glaciated terrain if that's where you're planning on traveling. And that's a whole other course in itself. But the general answer is yes, towards the middle and end of winter, the crevasses are filled in more.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, I don't see any more new questions in the chat or the hands raised feature, and that's fine. You guys did a great job answering those questions, and your presentations were just awesome. So we really appreciate you coming in, and we appreciate our audience very much and your interest in avalanche safety. So I'm just going to take over the reins here and let you know that you can support essential programs like these by donating as little as $10 to Avalanche Canada. You can click the link in the question or chat box, question/chat box to donate. Really, really appreciate those donations. They mean a ton to us. Our next webinar is going to be Wednesday, November 25th. It's going to be our local Staying Alive night, which normally happens here in Revelstoke. It's going online, so everybody can join in from all over the place. So you're welcome to join to that, and it's going to cover information from Avalanche Canada, from Parks Canada, Revelstoke Mountain Resort, Search and Rescue, and the Revelstoke Snowmobile Club. It's going to be really, really cool. Pre-registration is required just like it was tonight, and we really hope to see you then. Thanks so much, everybody. And we'll see you at the next webinar, and have a great, safe season.